All right, we are live. All right, here comes the intro. Welcome to another edition of the Crescent discussion group. This is a live stream that is dedicated to rightly dividing the truth between Christianity and Islam. We are here every Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time and every Tuesday evening at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I see the chat is filling up quite quickly. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you guys and all the comments that you guys make over there. And you guys, the mods who do their job over there, keep some of the trolls off of our back. So, welcome. And today we are joined by Thaddeus from Reasoned Answers YouTube channel. If you have not been over to his YouTube channel, then, well, you're a loser. No, I'm kidding. But you need to get over there and look at some of the material he has over there. One of the, and I emailed, he reached out this week, said that, hey, do you mind if I come? I'm like, it's the Pope Catholic. Of course you can come. But the thing that what I remember his channel so well is, number one, he had a video. You did a video, it was about a year and a half ago, and it was about this, about apostasy in Islam. And you had all those stats in there, and I'm like, good. And that's when I ended up bookmarking your channel and going over there and seeing all your material. Yes, sorry. There you go. I took the Queen of Kafiristan's pretzels last night. Came in to reclaim them. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Islam's heresies and their heretical beliefs, and what prompted this. Was, of course, all of us that don't have a life spend the rest of our time over in Clubhouse and engaging in conversations and whatever they are. And it's really good fun. But you learn a lot about the arguments of those people from whom you disagree. And I think it's a great place to share information and to learn what others believe and what justifications they use for that. And what prompted this show, and I think this is what prompted Thaddeus coming today, was the heretical beliefs of Muslims. Now, we can sit here and we can go, okay, well, of course, everything that they believe is heretical because they deny the deity of Christ, death, deity, and resurrection, all three of those, and they justify them. But what piqued my interest was how they justify them. What do they use to justify these belief systems? And I made a quick slideshow, and I'm not going to bore you all with it. I'm dragging it over here. Doggone you, Kaffir. You should have had this ready. I meant to work on it this afternoon before the show, but we went over to see my granddaughter, which is really important. We made a trip over there after church today, and she's growing she's only 2 weeks old. And so anytime you hold an infant that young, you're just like, oh, but then they grow up. And
that's true.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just run through this, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And then Paul has all kinds of notes he said he wanted to share. Thaddeus said that he has all kinds of different ideas that he wants to share with us today. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and share this, because I only have two points that I need to make here. So it's really not going to take all that long for me to get through this. But what I want to get these two ideas out there, and then we'll just open everything up for everybody to bring up the points that they wanted to make. Okay, so let's jump over here to their heretical beliefs. Now, we start with a couple facts. The Quran says it comes to confirm the Bible. However, when it says it comes to confirm the Bible, it contradicts the Bible. So what you have to do is you have to come up with what they call a rescuing device. You have to be able to reconcile what the Quran claims to do, and then develop an argument or apologetic to defend this claim when it is demonstrated to be false. So what they've come up with is to say that, okay, we know that the Quran contradicts the Bible, and so the reason why it contradicts the Bible is because the Bible has been corrupted, and here are the evidences that we have to demonstrate that the Bible has been corrupted. So this is kind of a rescuing device that they've developed. So when we look at Quran 4:157, this is what got me thinking about this. In this passage, we see that Jesus was not crucified. They slew him. I mean, if you look right here, they slew him not, nor crucified, and they know for certain that he did not die. Okay, so what is this? What do we have here? Well, number one, they call him the Messiah. No Jew in his right mind would call Jesus the Messiah. Well, not in his right mind, but any Jew at that time would not call Jesus the Messiah.
The unbelieving Jews.
To be more succinct. Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
They say he was not crucified. They say he was not killed. But yet we have 15 separate, independent, ancient sources that affirm the crucifixion. This is separate sources, guys, that he was crucified. So here you have the most well-documented event from antiquity being denied by Allah, the God of the universe, according to Muslims. And one thing I wanted to point out here is that there's not one peer-reviewed article out there in any reputable theological historical journal that denies the crucifixion of Jesus. They might deny that he was resurrected, of course, but historically, from a historical point of view, you cannot deny the resurrection. So what do they go with? They go with the Gospel of Barnabas. I mean, when I initially did my first show when I was on BTR a number of years ago, we had a certain imam out of Houston came on the show, and he said, well, we know that Jesus wasn't crucified. And I said, okay, well, what evidence do you have? He goes, well, the Gospel of Barnabas, of course, because we all know the Gospel of Barnabas is true, right? That's not, I mean, duh. I mean, it's probably the most obvious forgery, just as Muhammad's the most obvious false prophet in history. The Gospel of Barnabas is probably the most obvious forgery. It's anachronistic, number one. But number two, more importantly, for a Muslim to believe the Gospel of Barnabas, in the Gospel of Barnabas, Muhammad's the Messiah. What Muslim says that Muhammad is the Messiah? None. Okay, second thing that they would come up with is the second treatise of the Great Seth. And this was another Gnostic source. And this basically puts Simon the Cyrene on the cross. And then you have other Docetist beliefs. And I think the second treatise, the Great Seth, abides by this. Well, okay, Docetism. Okay, Docetism is to say that Jesus did not have a fleshly body. He was just a spirit. And in saying this, that Jesus was a spirit, how do you crucify a spirit? So therefore, they deny the crucifixion in that way. So here we're using a known forgery. What is this other one? A known Gnostic source that was written 100 and some odd years later. Docetism, which is a demonstrable heresy. And then you have, okay, let me put this back up here. Then you have the Basilides, of course. And this is another form of Docetic doctrine. And they have Simon the Cyrene dying on the cross again. And then you have all of these things are 100 years removed, and they're all condemned as heresies by the early church, with the exception of Gospel of Barnabas, of course, because it wasn't around. The Epistle of Barnabas. Now, this is where people they get confused. There's a difference between the Epistle of Barnabas, which is a known early second century writing, if I'm not mistaken, maybe third century, and the Gospel of Barnabas. So don't get the two confused. But here's my point. This is what I was thinking. In order to demonstrate the authentic, to authenticate, let's just put it that way, to authenticate what the Quran teaches, they have to go to known Christian heresies, things that have been proven to be false through church history. I mean, if you look at what the early church, and the only reason why we know about many of these early heresies is because of the issues raised by the early church fathers. The early church fathers wrote against her. I mean, isn't Irenaeus wrote against heresies? I mean, he has a whole set of books on this, for Pete's sake. Okay,
I've got that book. I really like it. Yeah, that
it's long,
Irenaeus.
It
is. I use it as a study. I don't read it page to page. I do it when I want to do a study on certain heretics. It's really good. I like it.
It's good material. You're right. It's rich. It's deep. But these guys are boring. I'm sorry. It just is. I mean, some of these guys, they just blow and just like,
okay,
shut up, get to your point.
I admit, I like reading. Yeah, I'm one of those guys who like reading histories of heresy. So, yeah.
Okay, so you're the two.
Yes, we are
on the whole planet. Okay, I'm glad we got that out of the way already.
We're studiers.
Okay. When we
Marines.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, let's jump to the next one, and I'm going to get through this as fast as I can. Okay, the Trinity. The Trinity, according to the Quran, is Allah, Jesus, and the Mother Mary. And look at these 4 verses here. If you look at 4:171, says, say not 3. And then it says here in 573, Allah is the third of 3. 575, it says his mother was a saintly woman. They both used to eat food. Now, why would you mention that they used to eat food? To demonstrate their humanity is why you would mention that. And then you get down here to, of course, 5:116. Oh, Jesus, son of Mary, did you say unto mankind, take me and my mother for 2 gods? No, he did not, because nobody ever thought that except for Muhammad. Now, notice the Quran does not say Trinity.
Wait, you got to include Allah in that because it's supposed to be Allah's voice in the Quran.
I got to include what?
You got to include Allah in saying that because, you know, if the Quran is Allah's voice.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's kind of a disconnected, disjointed way of saying that. Yeah. And when Allah saith, and Allah is saying this evidently. Okay, so the Quran doesn't say Trinity. And some of your newer editions of the Quran do say Trinity, but that's not what it has. A number, the Arabic number 4:3. It does not say Trinity. And again, 575 infers they ate food, only showing that they were creatures. 516 is, and these are the rescuing devices. Okay, this is what Muslims would say. And 5:116 is only a question. It doesn't mean that God was wondering if people really worshipped Mary. Then, of course, there's the go to the Coloridians. Now, nobody knows for certain what these people believed. These women, it was supposed to be some type of, not a monastery. What do they call one where women are, where the nuns are?
Nunneries?
No, don't they? I mean, it isn't. Okay, monks go to monasteries, but women go to where?
Nunneries.
Are they called nunneries?
Convents.
There you go. Okay, so they're in the convent. They believe this convent's out in the middle of the desert. That'd make you think silly things anyway, because it's 120 degrees out there, for Pete's sake. But we don't have any writings from them. The only thing that we have about what they believed are in refutations. And they're supposed to be an Arabic sect. So all of this makes perfectly good sense if you believe in heresies. And this is the whole point. if you believe in these heresies, you will use these heresies as a means to justify what the Quran teaches. So the bottom line is that the Quran, Muslims have to use events, places, persons, things that they know that have been demonstrated to be false in order to support the authenticity of the Quran, which is a very untenable place to be.
Which Eric, it proves that the Quran is from heresies. It's heretic. So they got to go to the heretics as well.
Well, I believe it is. And some of the reading that I was doing on this week, some people believe that Islam is a heretical sect of Christianity. And they go through this long list of connections on that. But, you know, I don't know. People come up with any theory they want to, I guess. All right. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Anything they want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll jump.
Tell me I'm wrong.
I'll jump in here.
Go ahead. Welcome to the show, by the way.
Yes,
we're excited to have you.
Thank you for having me on. You know, it's a very interesting topic. Good discussion.
What did you think of that intro? I was thinking that might scare you off a little bit. But, I mean, you took it like a man. You're like, oh my gosh, these guys are a bunch of crazies.
As I was about to say, that I've been looking into the origins of Islam, trying to determine, you know, history. You know, it's easy to just take the Islamic narrative for granted because it's kind of self-refuting. So why bother to question whether it's true or not? It's just kind of self-refuting. But I've been looking into the origins recently, and you know what we see is we see that the Quran contains a lot of earlier texts, and they're primarily Jewish texts. Actually, there's only a few that are Christian texts. But what I actually wanted to say, I guess that was an introduction of why I'm here, but what I actually wanted to say in response to what you said, before I was interested in Islam, just interested in general Christian apologetics, you know, I saw a talk on, you know, various different religions, and one thing they said that about Islam is that it must be false because it doesn't understand what the Trinity is, and it, you know, it quoted the verse which implies that Mary's part of the Trinity. So being a responsible person, I went and looked and saw if I could verify this. I found a Muslim response, and you know they argued that there was probably a tiny sect of Christians somewhere at some time that believed this, and I'm like, all right, I'm willing to grant that, but that doesn't actually solve the problem, right? Even if such a group existed, why is Allah condemning a tiny sect that may or may not have even existed instead of condemning the actual Christian belief? It's like he's clueless what Christians actually believe, or he doesn't want to condemn Christians, one or the other. But if he's supposedly saying that Christianity is corrupted and false, then why is he not addressing actual Christian beliefs in just some tiny sect?
Right. And that is amazing. If this is what this tiny sect believed, why would the God of the universe take his time out to to use them as an example when the rest of the Christianity doesn't believe that thing? That's, to me, that's what makes, and I completely agree, that's what makes it so absurd to use this one little sect out in the middle, the fringe of the Roman Empire at the time, as an example of what Christians believe. So say not three, and we have it. We've just proved that, you know, the Trinity is Mary, Jesus, and Allah, and it's absolutely absurd to think that this tiny sect could be or ever would be representative of the rest of Christendom. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think if you actually, you know, take the Quran seriously, as opposed to the Islamic narrative that developed a couple centuries later, it seems to think that it's affirming Christianity. It seems to think that it's teaching the same thing. That's false, of course, but the person who wrote the Quran, whether we want to call him Muhammad or whatever, seems to think that he's teaching the same message as what Christians teach. So, you know, he is condemning this tiny belief and not condemning Christianity because he thinks he agrees with Christianity.
Well, he's using, and you're right. I like the way you word that. This person called Muhammad, because there really isn't any hard evidence in the historicity of the existence of this Muhammad of what we find in Islamic sources or we've done shows on this before, where there's absolutely no evidence for Mecca either. And what he's doing is he's using just bits and pieces. You mentioned that a lot of these texts come from Jewish sources. Again, we have all kinds of different, what would we call them, like insertions from the Jewish Talmud, almost direct quotes from Midrash. But not only the Jewish sources, but we also have Syriac folklore in the Bible, for Pete's sake.
In the Quran.
What did I say? Did I say Bible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I got it.
We got your back, Eric. We got your back.
Keep me on my toes. Okay, so can you think of any other examples that might fit, Thaddeus, that might fit this, the two that I brought up, or that would be semi-consistent with those, or that you wanted to go over today?
Yeah, so what I've been looking into is kind of, who was the historical figure behind the Quran, just call him Muhammad for convenience. Definitely not the same person as what the Sirah describes much later. And one of the things that we realize is that the Quran quotes extensively from the Talmud, which is odd. Like the other things that it quotes from, okay, those, you could say those are probably circulating stories. They're pretty fantastic events. It's the kind of thing that people might transmit for fun. But the Talmud is the Jewish oral law. It's not exactly something that, would just be randomly quoted or available to average people. And you look at that and you say, what does that tell us? And I think what it tells us is that the figure writing the Quran was probably of a Jewish background. He was probably had some formal rabbinic training, and then he was probably kicked out of that, out of the group for his heretical ideas. I think that, he saw himself as God's prophet or whatever, and they're like, okay, all right, you've gone off the reservation, we're going to throw you out. But when we take this idea that Muhammad was probably Jewish, then it unlocks a new line of inquiry, if you will. You look at, if you're coming to it where he's copying primarily Christian ideas, which is the usual assumption, that's what you see in early Christian polemics and whatnot, that he's just copying from Christians. Well, that gets you some information, but it doesn't quite get you all the way there. And what I've inspired by the channel Islam Critiqued, looking into is whether Muhammad was a Jewish mystic. And when we look at certain material, that seems to be the case. If we look at the story of his initial revelation, where he was, going out into the wilderness and isolating himself for weeks, supposedly in prayer. Well, this is exactly what Jewish mystics did. They would isolate themselves in an attempt to get closer to God. They would, spend time in isolation without adequate food and water and whatnot. And then, okay, you say, well, that's a minor detail. Well, how does he react to what happens? Well, he immediately runs home and he says, "Cover me, cover me." Well, this is how the mystic who has had a spiritual encounter would protect themselves. They'd wrap themselves in a blanket, which protects them from the radiating heavenly energy. So you take those two things and you say, well, maybe this is what he was doing, and this is related to Merkabah mysticism, the idea that by following certain practices you can get close to God, go through the seven heavens. That may also sound like an Islamic term, also borrowed from Judaism. And so you go through the various heavens, you pass various tests, and then once you get all the way up there, you get to the throne. Merkabah means throne. You get to God's throne. And certain descriptions in the Quran of Allah on his throne, they sound like they borrowed from Merkabah ideas, that the creatures are carrying the thrones. Of course, the idea originates in the Bible, but then it's expanded upon in these Jewish mystic texts.
So when they're commenting upon what's in the Bible, so I've never heard this hypothesis before that Muhammad was a Jew. God forbid. I mean, could you? I wonder how long it would take to get your head cut off if you said that, like in Mecca or something like that.
Times,
have you? I've never heard this before. He was a mystic. I've heard that he. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I've heard it, but I want to go back to your comment on docetism, because in my notes I have that it was taught. The reason they taught that Jesus wasn't, that his body didn't, stuff about his body, that it arose from Gnostic dislike of matter and suffering associated with God. So my notes said they taught that the Redeemer came to deliver the divine spark of goodness in man, but since matter is evil, and he had to assume a phantom body, which appeared like a normal earthly one. So he couldn't even have a physical body because they couldn't accept that. This is refuted in Scripture on 1 John chapter 4, verses 1-3. So these guys are already beat up with Scripture by the time they come out. I think that's hilarious. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Hereby know you the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of Antichrist, whereof you have heard that it should come, and even now already it is in the world.
I think it's ironic that the Muslims will quote these Gnostic texts to try to prove that Jesus wasn't crucified, when these texts are arguing that Jesus is purely spiritual, the exact opposite of the Muslim belief, that he's purely human. So it just kind of shows the desperation, go to anything.
That's the exact word, desperation.
Desperation, yep.
I agree 100%.
Go to a text that's from the 1500s. I mean, come on, how insanely stupid is that?
My understanding was that the Docetists, or specifically, what was it, the Marcionians, believed that Jesus didn't have a body because the flesh is sinful, and therefore, if Jesus is sinless, incapable of sin, he therefore could not have.
That's basically what that's saying.
Okay, all right. So I just thought maybe that I missed that.
But that's because they reject John 1. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
And I don't know how you get around that.
Well, right,
really
exactly.
They have to reject that because they will say the flesh concept is not. They would go around it by saying they would perceive it as different. So they create their own excuses. It's like you start with a premise and you end. It's called circular reasoning, is what it comes down to. You start with your final premise and you end up with it.
Yeah, to be clear, Marcion rejected, or as near as we can tell, he rejected all of the Gospels except for an edited version of Luke.
Yeah.
And he accepted most of the letters of Paul and an edited version of Luke, and he didn't accept anything else. So, yeah, John 1, that's off the table for Marcion.
Now, wasn't he from Alexandria? I mean, if he's from Egypt, am I correct on this?
He's from Pontus, I believe.
Where?
Marcion is from Pontus, I believe.
Where's that?
Wasn't Tertullian a Marcionist? Because he was a Marcionist in his later life. Because in his early life, because Tertullian he was one of the early church fathers that actually.
No, I'm talking about Marcion. Was he from Alexandria? And I guess it's immaterial. It doesn't really matter. I'm just thinking, okay, the bottom line is that you have these people, these groups developing hundreds of miles away from the very place that they are saying that they're not even geographically tied to this place, but yet they're developing doctrine that is completely antithetical was taught by the apostles, and they're doing it from hundreds of miles away and over a century away, or detached from this. But yet Muslims are using these arguments as a basis to refute what is written in the gospel record, and in turn saying, look, we know that the gospel, they would never accept anything, for example, from the Nation of Islam to say that the Nation of Islam is a orthodox Islamic group. But yet, when you have these demonstrable heretical groups in the 2nd century, they're saying, well, we have to believe them because we know the Bible's been corrupted. How do we know the Bible's corrupted? Because it doesn't agree with the Quran, even though the Quran says that it came to confirm the Bible. It makes absolutely no sense. It'll drive you nuts trying to carry on a conversation with some of these people.
Well, when you actually look into who Marcion was and what he actually believed, that's enough to drive anybody nuts by itself. I have tons of notes on Marcion, and I mean, they're very, very specific. And you start looking at this, like, you actually look at this and you have to think when you're reading it, okay, he had me, today you might equate this as a guy who has a PhD with no common sense and, no grounding in the scriptures. So, I mean, if you can't ground yourself in the word of God and then claim you have all this knowledge, something's wrong with you mentally. That's where I would start thinking. You're going to start there.
Let me make a comment here about the chat. Folks, don't block people in the chat unless they're writing offensive, they're swearing or using inappropriate language, or they're blaspheming Christ. They can call me any name in the book. I don't care. But as long as they're not blaspheming Christ, but just be careful on who you're blocking. Okay, Thaddeus. Okay, what did you are you going to add to what you were saying before?
I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a very interesting set of hadith that are considered sahih, accepted by Muslims, that describe this encounter between Muhammad and a young boy, Ibn Sayyid. Muhammad encounters Ibn Sayyid in the garden, and Sayyid's wrapped in a blanket and he's murmuring, and Muhammad's trying to spy on him. And then his mother makes him aware that Muhammad's there, and then they kind of have this conversation. And if you read the conversation and you read Jewish texts on Merkavah and how masters and students interacted, it seems to be what's going on here, that Ibn Sayyid is testing Muhammad and Muhammad's testing him, and they speak of things like seeing the throne and seeing deception and seeing smoke. All these things are common in the Merkavah texts. And it's kind of smoking gun, if you will, that this is what was going on, or at least, if we say that these texts don't really go back to Muhammad, it at least says that early Muslims held these beliefs, that there was at least some within the Islamic group, or proto-Islamic, I really should say, that held to these ideas that you could, through certain ritual practices, you could go and you could go and see the throne room. You could go and see God in person, if you will. And it's just very interesting the way that these two interact. And in one of the texts, a version of one of the texts that's considered Sahih, which it itself isn't, it even speaks of the Hayat, which is the Hebrew word for creature, the creatures that carry the throne. So this is, by itself, maybe we say that, this isn't like super duper important, but when you look at the hard evidence of the textual origin of the Quran and these very interesting hadith, I think we definitely get the impression that Judaism was a major influence, and specifically the mystic ideas, as opposed to Orthodox Jewish ideas. These mystic ideas about how you can get close to God and travel through the heavens. The story of Muhammad riding the Buraq up into heaven, and then going through the layers and meeting different folks as he's going through. Same idea that it doesn't specifically speak of the mystic texts in that story. It's been whitewashed, cleansed, whatever. But the same idea that the righteous person is able to go up higher levels after they pass a test. So I think that this is definitely something to consider. That perhaps when we're looking at heretical Christian ideas, we're not really looking at the root. That would certainly came in later. It certainly came in some point, I should say, because obviously it's there, right? But I think that the first level is that the founder of the proto-Islam, which it really can't be called Islam at all, and they apparently call themselves the believers even. They didn't even call themselves Muslims. But this earliest layer, I think, is primarily influenced by Jewish ideas. And then as they're growing outward, then they're absorbing more and more texts. And, Muhammad is the ear, according to the Quran, that he just hears anything and adds it. He's taking it, and whether that reflects a historical person or not, that is what Islam did. It took, source here, source there, brought it all together, tried to form something cohesive, and because it was primarily motivated by military conquest, it wasn't primarily motivated by theology in these early stages. So they're just taking anything and everything, and then they got this huge mess, and they got to try to come up with a story about how it all works. And that's where all the the Hadith literature and the Sirah and whatnot, all that comes in later to try to make sense of it. But the Quran is established at an early day, and thus it's not easy to change. I mean, there's probably some minor changes, redactions, whatever, but it paints a very different picture. It paints a picture that was much earlier on than the picture of Muhammad we find in Ibn Ishaq or the Hadith or the later Sirah or whatever the case may be. So I think that we need to, if we're looking for the truth, if we're looking for what really happened, then I think we need to look to a Jewish text. We need to look to Jewish beliefs of the 6th century as primary influences of how things began, not necessarily how Islam developed in the 2nd century AH when the Hadith and Sirah start to be written, but how it originally came about. We need to look to Jewish ideas, and then later on they absorb these Christian texts as they're trying to be friendly to wider groups of people. They're like, oh yes, we teach the same things as Christians do. Come and join us. Come and join our conquest. You'll have plenty of war booty. The religion, don't worry about that too much. We're pretty flexible on that. So I think that's pretty much how it came about. But because they're just taking everything, no discernment, they end up with all these ridiculous heretical ideas. And actually, pretty much the only thing that isn't copied is the canonical New Testament. There's maybe a few vague allusions to it, but for the most part, the canonical New Testament really doesn't enter into Islam. And I just have to say that that's highly odd. It's almost like, God was involved there protecting them from absorbing those ideas and making it clear that what they're teaching is false.
I'd just like to chime in here real quick. First of all, Muhammad, as a day 3 of my Islamic journey, taking Shahada on April Fools, I just have to say that Muhammad was not a Jew. He was a true, pure Arab blood, and he was a repeater, not a reader. So therefore, you should all stop reading and follow the advice, follow the Prophet Muhammad, okay, and not read anymore. See, because if you don't read, okay, you just repeat, Islam actually makes sense. But no, I just wanted to chime in here real quick.
Okay, Rad, hold on, Rad. Rad, hold on just a second. Before you say anything now, with your Shahada in the practice of Ramadan, if you don't want to get in trouble with the cleric down there at the mosque, You need to quit posting pictures of beer on your Facebook page.
Oh, that was my Ramadan meal, man.
I'm just
I wasn't doing
saying.
it right. The Mufti was there with me, man. Come on, he's the one who's telling me. That was challah beer. Challah beer.
All right, whatever.
Anyway,
okay.
well, no. So no. There's an actual method of my madness. You said that Thaddeus, right? Said that they come up with all these heretical ideas. Well, here's the funny thing: the reverts that we encounter, guess what? They come up with all kinds of heretical ideas about Islam, and they repeat stuff that if they were to repeat in a true Muslim Islamic area, they would be corrected. First of all, if they kept repeating it, they would be beaten, and if they kept repeating it, they would be killed. You know what I mean? I mean, they come up with some goofy ideas that we encounter with these. Oh no, you don't have to kill apostates. Wrong. Oh no, you don't have to. You can do all this other stuff. Oh no, that's wrong. And they actually borrow from whatever understanding of the religion that they came from, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, or whatever, or a modern world, the atheist, secularist worldview. They actually borrow from that and incorporate that into their Islam. And they tell you that this is Islam when you're like, no, that's not. Because we're not like you. We're actually readers and not repeaters. And we don't follow the Prophet Muhammad. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. You know, we think of Islam as being what we hear from, you know, the people with all the money, the people from Saudi Arabia and whatnot, sponsoring all these dawah campaigns and whatnot.
He's muted himself.
Thaddeus, you muted yourself.
Muted.
Something happened to your. Hold on, let me. Okay, try and
All
there
right,
we go. Okay, there you go.
I should be back. So the cat unplugged the microphone.
I blame mine for that kind of stuff too.
No, he's right here.
No, I got my cat usually sits right here. The problem is when he sits right here, I sneeze the entire show, so I had to ban him from the studio.
Go up.
Yeah, he's no longer allowed in my Mecca.
So anyway, as I was saying, the global picture of Islam is quite different than, you know, the Wahhabi idea. The largest sect of Muslims are from, you know, Southeast Asia, where they practice very synchronistic beliefs. They have all kinds of influences from local tribal religions and whatnot, and they practice all kinds of things that people from the Middle East would say are definitely not Islam, and they're very polytheistic, paganist, however you want to say it. But I think that the reason I said that's a good point is because this is how Islam's always been, right? It just absorbs whatever ideas you want, and as long as you say you're part of Islam and you're willing to participate in the spread of Islam, no one has a problem with that. And, you know, it's like you don't have to have correct beliefs to be part of Islam as long as you're part of the political system.
Right. It reminds me of that lizard that it cloaks itself and makes it look like a tree if it's on a tree, or if it cloaks itself, it's up on a green plant. It becomes
Chameleon? Is that what you're
yes,
saying?
a chameleon.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And they love Jesus, right? Well, Jesus
Right,
is
yeah.
God. Do
And
they
that's
love
it-
Jesus?
Yeah,
No, they
it's
love Isa. Isa.
There you go.
the wrong one, sure. Okay, I had a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about this idea. Okay, if Muhammad was supposed to be a Jewish mystic, do you think that would explain the direction of the Qibla being changed? When he's rejected by the Jews, he therefore changes the direction of prayer. Do you think that would correlate to that?
It's a possibility. You know, I haven't really looked a great deal into that effort. That is an important data point that needs to be taken into consideration. I think that certainly something that happened, which is kind of unrelated to what I've been talking about, but I think something that happened is when the Umayyads were losing in power, and the power was shifting to the south, that's when they rewrote the narratives. They rewrote the idea that I think that when you look at the non-Muslim historical text, it looks like Muhammad was probably still alive during the conquest of Syria and Jerusalem and whatnot. and then they rewrote it. They made him die earlier so that he would die down south, and they were shifting the power from Syria to Mecca. So that's where the idea that Mecca was invented. So I think that probably that's when the shift would have occurred. But it does, and I also think that that's when all the anti-Jewish elements were coming in, because it become a political priority to be against Judaism at that point, or maybe slightly before that. They early on they seem to be accepting of Jewish people. If you look at the non-Islamic texts, it seems that some Jewish people were accepting the idea that Muhammad was an agent of God, and that they were, because they thought that his armies were going to free them from the Romans, that they were going to overthrow technically the Byzantines, but referred to as the Romans, overthrow them and give them back the control of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. So they were kind of agreeing with the possibility that Muhammad might be a messenger of God. And then all of a sudden we get all these texts, that are written 200 years later that make Islam profoundly anti-Jewish. And I think that there was a political reason for that. I think that, when the Jewish, perhaps the earlier followers that were Jewish, when they didn't actually get what they expected, they're like, all right, he's clearly a false prophet. He didn't do what he said he was going to do. And then since they're rejecting the Islamic system that's being developed, and it's like, all right, we got to write all these stories into Muhammad to say that he was anti-Jewish.
Okay, so here, go ahead, Dominic. I'm sorry.
Because I was thinking, I mean, even with the hadiths, how do you know they're talking about the same Muhammad?
Right. So that's the tricky part.
There's no way. There's no way that you can know that they're talking about the same Muhammad.
Right. So that's a really tricky part, is that all of the materials have been edited, they've been whitewashed, they've been collected. So what I'm looking for is things that make sense of strange things, right? So I take the Quran as being the primary source text, because it hasn't been edited all that much, because it was established too early to really be able to be whitewashed the way the other material was. So then when you see something that occurs in the Quran or in non-Islamic texts, history texts outside of Islam, and then things that are still in the Hadith literature or Sirah or whatever that don't really make any sense by themselves, but when you fill in the picture from the other sources that kind of work together, I think that kind of works, it enhances both, because these are things that are too vague for them to have realized they need to edit out of these texts, like they'd forgotten the cultural context of why the Hadith said these things, and then it can, so that's why there's this mysterious detail that doesn't really seem to make any sense with the standard narrative. And then when the other sources kind of work together, then that's kind of my hint that this might be an actual historical thing. It is very tricky, though, because it's quite clear that they purposely whitewashed their history. There's plenty of materials from the first century, second century, third century, fourth century. Then all of a sudden, there's nothing from the 5th century, 6th century, 7th century. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we get a huge dump of new literature. So it seems that the stuff in between was intentionally destroyed, in my opinion.
Because the interesting thing is also you have pictures of Muhammad before, all the way up to the 14th century. So you have, which completely debunks that kind of time period, which may even say the hadiths may even actually be later, due to the fact of that there's you have actual images of Muhammad that shouldn't be around if they're following those actual hadiths. So which causes multiple problems. But then that's only one of multiple problems of kind of things that you can bring up.
Yeah, well, I think that the story that we can say for sure is that Islam has continued to evolve. Whatever it is now is not what it was in the year 1400, and what it was in 1400. It's not what it was in 900, and what it was in 900. It's not what it was in 800, and what it was in 800 is not what Muhammad said remotely, because we have a good portion of the biography written by Ibn Ishaq, and that paints a different picture than the Hadith that only come like 50, 100 years later in principle. And then the Hadith are no longer acceptable to modern Muslims. They'll find excuse.
Oh, you went mute again, Thaddeus. Bad kitty.
So he came in and knocked it out, and then he left and he knocked it out again. Sometimes I close the door when I'm live streaming, but I did not think to do that today. But anyway, so the narrative behind Muhammad has continued to evolve, and you talk to Muslims today, and they'll often tell you things about Muhammad which come only from 19th or 20th century works, that they don't exist prior to that. They're just completely made up stories, and they're now accepted as true. So, yeah, I think that Islam has continued to develop throughout its history because it doesn't really have a solid theological core.
But even with the Quran, even with the aspect of the Quran, I mean, you look at the Quran, and like you said, you've got different writings. Because I looked at because with the Talmud, you have time periods in the Talmud writings. So you have, I can't remember the different writers that you have in the actual Talmud kind of thing. So you can actually date those kind of time periods, and it's kind of different there. So the Quran is almost like a compilation as well. So you've got a compilation over time with actual Quran, and you've got there's no way to know that even. So you got Ibn Ishaq. There's no way to know that he actually wrote his like you haven't got outside sources. Like we've got the early church fathers to prove the fact of that. Okay, that John wrote John, or that the Gospels wrote the Gospels. There's no way that there's any evidence to the fact that even Hadiths were produced by the writers that themselves, or kind of things like that. You've got no kind of firm proof to actually state the fact. So if because they always argue with us about authorship, like say who authored the Book of John or who authored the things like that. But they've got a much larger problem. So,
well, absolutely. I found that whenever Muslims make a claim about another religion, it's because they're hiding something in their own. So they talk about the canonization of the New Testament as if it's highly problematic. Well, that's to cover up their own problems with canonization.
Yes.
And they talk about how Christianity is anti-science, or how the Bible is unscientific. Well, that's to cover up all the scientific problems in the Quran and so forth.
Well,
every claim they make is to cover up something.
Are you saying that the sun doesn't set in a muddy pool of water?
Yeah. Unfortunately, science hasn't caught up with the Quran.
I'm just thinking. Well, you're absolutely right. This is what we call projection. You're projecting your own shortcomings upon somebody else, and this is exactly what we find when we find that we have something as far as the canon, or the origins of your text, or if the traditions of your belief system. For example, paganism. I mean, how pagan can you get by going out into the middle of nowhere and walking around a tent 7 times and calling that monotheism, or running in between these 2 hills, Safa and Marwa? But they don't even do that anymore. I think they have one of them speed walkers in there. It doesn't matter. But I mean, or throwing rocks at a rock. How can it doesn't get any more? So it is exactly what it is. Projection is exactly what it is.
Here's the funny thing. This is like really supernatural, but we have the Rock of Ages. Jesus is the rock, right? Muslims literally have a rock. Okay, think about this. If they touch that black stone, it takes away their sins. Okay, they touch or cast it or kiss it. They believe it takes away their sins. That's why it's black. Remember, it used to be white, but because of all the sins of the people touching it, it turned black. So they have an actual rock where we have the true rock of ages. Okay, that takes away the sins of mankind.
Yes, it's all a mockery.
Yeah, it's exactly.
Isn't there a hadith where Abu Bakr says that the only reason why he's kissing the black stone is because
Muhammad did.
Because Muhammad
Yes.
did it. So how does that
And-
evolve into kissing this black stone absolves you of all your sins? Where did that tradition come from?
Because we have the rock, and when they encountered early Christians, they were referring to Jesus as the rock of ages that takes away the sins.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
They say, no, we've got the real rock. It's a black stone in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. That's in the cornerstone of the building. Remember, he's also the cornerstone. And the capstone,
Right.
the cornerstone, okay, of the Kaaba is
Of the Kaaba.
is the rock. Yeah. Okay, so think about this. Okay, I mean, no, it is all a mockery of Christ. It is
Yes.
turning it upside down and giving you this false thing.
Sorry, no, please.
Well, no, I was just going to finish up with this. And they got lots of rocks, okay? For instance, okay, well, like you said, they throw a rock at a rock to cast the devil away. Like, that's going to do anything. Not only that, but they've got, seriously, if you go to the Dome of the Rock, which is on top of a rock, okay, on the Temple Mount, okay, all right, they literally have this little shrine where I don't know if you got to pay money to do it, well, not pay money, but donate money. But they have this little shrine where you stick your hand in, okay, all right, and you touch the fingerprints where Muhammad touched the rocks because the rocks wanted to go up to heaven with him. And he was pushing the rocks down. He was pushing the rocks down with such force that he left his hand impressions in this rock. I mean, it's all about the rock, baby. It's all about the rock.
Yeah, they're rocking pretty good, man.
You and your music, that's spot on. I get it. Okay, all right. So I wanted to sharpshoot your hypothesis on the mystic Muhammad being a Jew, and then I got to thinking. I said, no, that's because the more you started talking about, because I'm saying, well, if Muhammad was a mystic Jew, why isn't Jerusalem mentioned one time in the Quran? But then as you started talking about this being a process, a battle between the Umayyad and the Abbasid and all these dynasties, subsequent dynasties, how the Quran was changed, redacted. They could have just edited Jerusalem completely out of the entire spiel as time went on. What do you think of that?
Well, I would say that the Quran doesn't really speak of specific places pretty much at all. It only mentions Mecca once, and it doesn't really mention specific places because the Quran isn't really talking about contemporary events. It's only looking back, providing a reminder, as it claims to do, of what the past prophets did. The Quran isn't really about Muhammad at all, except that it conveys this idea that the end times are upon us. So he's looking back, he's saying these are what all the prophets had said, and whoa, the last hour is almost here. And this is another thing that we don't typically hear, we don't typically read about. But if you look at the Quran, it talks a lot about the hour, as it puts it. And if you just read it and you just say the hour, well, what's that? Well, it's intended to be the last hour. Mm-hmm. And there are hadith that back this, that hadith about Muhammad saying, or put on Muhammad's mouth anyway, that this young boy living now will still be alive when the last hour comes, and how it will 100 years from now no one will be left alive, that kind of thing. So he seemed to think that the end times were upon it. So it's not really about things that are happening in his time. It's like looking back at the past exclusively and saying this is where all the prophets have been leading, and they've been leading up to this end times, which is about to occur.
Okay, so when we look at when you say it's apocalyptic. Is that what okay? That's what you're saying. Where specifically are we finding things like that? Because I understand that Muhammad, let me just be honest. I've read the Quran 4 times, completely through, from front to end, and of course I've referred to it, several times. And it is, and I've said this several times in the show, it is penance reading that thing. It really, truly is trying to understand what. I mean, seriously. I mean, it's just all over the place, and it's like a kid with ADHD. He'll start one thought and then get in the middle of it, and he's off to something else. And then at some point in time, he later brings it back. So where specifically are we talking about this?
Well, I wasn't prepared to talk about this, and I don't have the verses memorized. I can look them up if you like, but you are definitely right about the Quran. It's really hard to read. It's really hard to understand. It jumps all over the place all the time, and that probably suggests something about how it came about, that they're taking all these texts that are independent units and they're just kind of joining them together. Even the Muslim narrative would agree with that these things were revealed piecemeal and then they were joined together. Of course, I don't think they're actually revealed. I think that they copied a little bit from one text and a little bit from another, and the person editing it didn't necessarily do a good job. But that's consistent with the way storytelling works. It's consistent with the way storytelling works. If the audience already knows the story, then you can recall the whole story with just a few words. You don't have to go into the whole story. So I think that it is actually consistent with the Islamic claims that this was revealed orally and so forth. I think that the hard evidence leads that way. There's works written about testing whether it was delivered orally, and they seem to agree that most of it was delivered orally at some point. But it's consistent with oral storytelling in that it doesn't give you the details. You're expected to already know them, which flies in the face of what it claims to be. It claims to be a complete revelation and that with all the details to understand it. But what it really is it's speaking to people who are already familiar with these stories, speaking to Jewish and Christian people who are already familiar with all these stories. So when he says, remember Noah, they already know what he's talking about. And he doesn't have to go into great detail, that kind of thing.
There was a book written, actually, this is the book right here. I don't know if you've seen this. This is an oral formulated study of the Quran with Andrew Bannister. And exactly what you're talking about, how these stories have been demonstrated to have originated through an oral type tradition of storytelling with a premise that you would understand already some of the certain facts within them. But I would also add to that when Uthman, was it Uthman? Yeah, Uthman's the one that actually edited and put the Quran together, and Call Imam said it perfectly here. These stories or these surahs are arranged by how long they are, not chronologically or when they're supposed to appear, when these events occurred in the life of Muhammad, supposedly. That he's got to be hashtag worst editor in history type material. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, we actually see that pattern. I don't know why ancient people did that, but they often would arrange things by length. You actually see that with the letters of Paul in the Bible, that they're arranged from longest to shortest. I mean, it doesn't matter. Each one stands independently, but that's the order they chose to present them. And we see this in other literature as well, that it's really common to organize things either from shortest to longest or longest to shortest. Why people did that, I don't really know. But
I can explain that. It's money. So the fact is that if you were writing something in the ancient, there's a book that I've got that kind of discusses it. The more writing you've got, the more money it costs to actually write down the actual kind of letter. So that was what they did in ancient times.
You would write the longest first, so you get paid the most. That makes sense.
So yeah,
that makes perfect sense, because I mean, First Thessalonians. I mean, how that's supposed to be the first New Testament book written, from my understanding, and that is what, 4 chapters or 4? I would have to look, but I mean, it's not long at all. So there you go. That makes perfectly good sense. Okay. So, okay, folks, whatever is going on in chat, I don't have time to fix it right now. I'll fix it after the show's over. Okay. So everybody just chill, enjoy each other, fellowship with one another. I don't want to get involved in all that. Okay. So, comment warrior. There you go. All right. So I wanted to ask a question about your channel, Thaddeus.
Okay.
Because you've had several different people on there, like Islam Critiqued. Colin's been on there. Now, have you had Sam Shimon on there before?
I have not.
I haven't. Okay, I haven't seen any videos. Are you aware of?
Well, actually, I should clarify. He did join a live stream once, right at the end of it, just on his own accord. I didn't invite him or anything, but he discovered it and he popped in to say hi for like 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. There was Jay Smith. Are you familiar with his work? Have you?
I have not worked with Jay.
Okay. How about Dan Gibson? Are you aware of his work?
Yes, I'm aware of it. I have no, I don't follow his work all that closely, but I probably should because
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
I only like a month or two ago did I really start to become interested in origins.
Okay.
Do you follow Sneaker's Corner?
Yes.
Mel, he's good.
Yeah, I've had Mel on like 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
Didn't you just do an interview with? What was that? I thought I just saw you did it. Was that you that did an interview with, or was that Jay?
That's
Recently.
probably Jay. I'm probably having Mel on soon, but I haven't had him on recently, so you're probably thinking of something else.
Okay. All right. So another heresy. Do you have any other heresies that you want to discuss here with us today?
Nope. That is what I wanted to bring in up. You're definitely your original points about the Jesus not being crucified coming from, or at least attempting to be supported by, late 2nd century, early 3rd century Gnostic texts is spot on. But I wasn't planning on talking about it directly.
Okay. All right. Paul, are you still there? Paul was having some issues at the beginning of the show with focusing, and I thought, well, he was under the weather earlier this week, and he was out of focus. But I thought, that doesn't have anything to do with the camera focusing on you being sick or anything.
It's just
look at him. I mean, he's not.
He looks so fuzzy.
I can read the title of the books behind him, but I can't really see it. Okay,
it's funny that
He's got a glow around him. He's got it's an angelic glow around him.
He does.
He's got the Shekinah going. Look at him. Yeah.
Background music.
It's interesting they mention they like Marcion, but we have one of the church fathers, Polycarp. It says this is from it says, and Polycarp to himself when Marcion came into his sight and said, "Do you know me?" He replied, "I know you, the firstborn of Satan." So this is
Marcion said that to Polycarp, or Polycarp said that to Marcion?
Polycarp said that to Marcion.
Okay, yeah, that makes because they were contemporaneous.
That's from Irenaeus Adversus Heresies. Yeah.
Also, not to mention Marcion in his what they call the original Bible claims that Christ was crucified, and actually. Marcion's whole thing is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that the God of the Old Testament was an evil God, and that Jesus was a good God.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So their whole love affair with Marcion. Well, again, they can't be consistent in their own inconsistency. I mean, seriously, they're just horrendous.
Yeah, they can.
Argumentation.
I've got a whole bunch of notes on all that, but this is incredible. Their concept, and that would fit the 3 gods, and it wouldn't be a Trinity, and that's important to understand. Marcion and many of these Gnostic idiots really didn't have a concept of the Christian God. They had no clue what Christians really believed. They played with it. That's as close as they got to the scriptures. They played with it. They didn't really dig in deep. They weren't Bereans. They didn't check the scriptures. These are guys who wanted to create their own faith structure, and that's nothing more.
They were
Sounds like
repeaters and
Islam.
not readers. Yeah, they were
Right.
repeaters and
Sounds
not
like
readers.
Islam.
Well,
Yeah.
going back to Islam and what, Thaddeus, my background is I'm a retired special ed teacher. And one of the things that I have been saying to Muslims that have come on some of the shows and wanted to debate, I've listened to them, and I said, you got to get above a third grade comprehension level or third grade reading level. If you want to debate, you got to get above third grade, because at least in the United States, we don't consider you a successful person if you can't read above a third grade level. And, it's actually something we talk about as high school teachers and secondary teachers. We talk about this, right, Eric? We have huge meetings on this. We're getting 25% of our kids can't read above. We do have these discussions. I worked in an inner city schools, but that's unfortunately that is a truth for what we've had a lot of Muslims on this particular show that, I sit there, the ones I listen to when they come on, they don't listen. They have a low comprehension scale, and their reading comprehension is even lower. So I'm hoping someday we run into Muslims who can actually understand logic, which, at some point it would be nice. Then we can actually show them Jesus, because that's pretty simple then.
Well, I have a saying that we have a term for Muslims who carefully and honestly consider the truth of Islam, and that term is ex-Muslim.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's exactly.
We call them
Yeah.
apostates. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, we call them apostates. Those people. There was David Wood did a video.
Oh yeah, that was beautiful.
This morning, and he talks about the guy. Correct me when I make a mistake here. Here you have a guy from Australia who converts to Islam, and he gives all these speeches, and he's very popular. And then he becomes an ISIS jihadi, and then goes to the Philippines and gets caught trying to kill people, which is a bad thing in the Philippines. Gets thrown in a jail, and then when he's in jail, I guess he has this gift of linguistics. He can learn languages quickly, which some people don't have the ability to learn a foreign language. I'm one of them. When I was in Italy, I lived in Italy. I'm retired Army, so I've lived in Italy. I've lived in Panama. Italian and Spanish are very similar, and I could get my point across, but they would look at me like I had a horn growing out of my forehead when I would talk. So some people don't have the ability. I mean, they're like, "What did you try to say? Why don't you just speak English to me? I understand your English better than your Italian." But anyway, but this guy had a gift to where he learned Aramaic, and he learned the Arabic. And when he started comparing these stories, and the one was the Dual Carnain, the story of Alexander
the Great.
Going to the place where the sun sat in a muddy pool. And this is where he just said, okay, I'm out. He's used his linguistic ability to ascertain for sure that this story is a pre-Islamic story, like many stories in the Quran are pre-Islamic, and it's basically a fairy tale, but yet it's being passed off as the final revelation of Allah to mankind. And he's like, look, I can no longer tolerate this kind of crap. And that's not the only story we find in the Quran. You mentioned this earlier, Thaddeus. There's all kinds of different. For example, 532, where it talks about, for we have ordained for the Jews that if anybody kills one man, he's killed all mankind. And saved one person, he saved all mankind. Well, that comes right out of Midrash Sanhedrin 4.5. I mean, it's almost a direct quote from that. So to think that. So when you say that Muhammad was a Jew, well, that makes perfectly good sense, because only Jews would know about these specific writings. Now, how popular were those at that time? I mean, as far as disseminated across, Jewish tribes, for example.
Yeah, so some of the things like the midrash, some of those stories I could definitely see being like popular, told in a storytelling setting, because they do make more entertaining versions of biblical stories in many cases. They kind of fill in the missing details and make a more extraordinary story. So I could definitely see those things being transmitted orally. But the things that are direct quotes from the Talmud, I just don't see how those could come about except by someone actually studying the Talmud.
Because Steve has done a series of videos. Steve has done a series of videos on the sources recently.
Who has?
Steve. He's normally here. He just did a whole series of videos on the sources. So he went through the Talmud sources in the Quran, the actual Torah sources in the Quran. Like he's done a whole series of videos just on it recently.
I only watch his police videos, so I don't know.
Steve Hussein Mashni.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm thinking Steve.
Our guitar player.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Our pastor. He's now a pastor in that church.
Did you see that the video that he posted up on Facebook where he's dressed up as an imam?
Alhamdulillah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that guy!
So cute.
I mean, it was
He's awesome.
It was just as perfect as Mary coming on here last Tuesday with the niqab and that. I mean, because just as soon as I let her into because she was the first one in here before the show on Tuesday, and I clicked on that, and I about fell out of my chair. I just laughed so hard. I said, "What is this?"
Awesome.
He called it
awesome.
I would like to rejoin what Thaddeus said about Talmud quotes. There's actually passages in the Quran. I have a simpler explanation because the Quran gives that explanation, okay, as well as hadiths. The Quran condemns Jews for selling scripture at a measly price, okay? All right? Not only that, but there are also hadiths where Muhammad is buying scripture or they are selling scripture to Muhammad and his companions. So my thing is this: they would sell him Talmud stories, but the Talmud stories are not right. They're not direct quotes. They're corrupted in a specific way. And remember, they're always talking about the corruption of the scriptures. So these Jews were laughing themselves silly. They were saying, okay, he's a prophet. Why is he buying scripture from us? And okay, we're going to sell him. We're going to test him. Because if he is a prophet, because look at the story of Jesus in the temple, how they were amazed. Okay, as a little boy, that he knew scripture left and right. They were completely amazed at him. Well, here you have Muhammad in this story trying to imitate that, I guess you would say. Okay, in some degree. And they're
in his 50s.
and they're selling him this bogus scripture. And so they're testing him. Well, let's see, if he is a prophet, then he would know that what we're selling him is garbage. And then he would go and repeat this stuff. And these Jews would be laughing themselves silly, saying, see, no, look, we sold him that. And it's wrong. We corrupted it. He didn't even know it. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. So now he's totally busted. Well, then he gets a Quranic verse. Oh, woe to you who sell scripture for miserly price and change the words of its meanings. How dare you do that? How dare you dupe the prophet? How dare you pull the wool over his eyes? I was really testing you to see if you knew. You know what I mean? No, dude. Epic failure.
Jeez. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting idea. I hadn't considered that possibility, but that's definitely worth further exploration. Now, you mentioned the story of Dhul Qarnayn. I imagine most of you probably know the story of how that came about, how that supposed revelation came, that a group of, I believe, 3 rabbis came and they asked him 3 questions. And he forgot to say inshallah, so he couldn't get the revelation, and Jibreel left him clueless for a period of time. And then he finally got it. And
you went, okay, that cat, there he is.
Yeah.
I heard him meowing too. He's like, meow, here I come.
Satan doesn't want him talking. Satan doesn't want him talking.
I'm thinking he probably, what you need to do, Thaddeus, is you need to put a Quran next to that cord, because we know a cat will not pick up on a Quran.
That could work. So as I was saying that, Jibreel leaves him clueless for a while, and then he eventually consults with enough people and he gets the stories, but 2 of the 3 questions turn out to be the story of Dul Carnain and the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. So it's like they were tricking him, right? They asked him a story about these supposed revelations, and then he repeats these stories that everyone knew were not true.
Right.
Wow. Jeez.
And even Allah corrected them, saying, you say that he is just telling tales of old. No, these are from Allah. Oh, Allah gives the answer to the no, he doesn't. No, God. Wait, don't you guys know? Wait. Okay, he has to be a prophet. How does he know? Because the Jews tested him. They asked him, tell us only 3 things that only a prophet would know. But, well, wait a second. Nobody thought to say, well, if you're asking the questions only a prophet would know, how would you know the answers? But evidently...
Right, except you're a prophet, too.
We're going to be eating fish livers. Mm-hmm. Oh, tasty stuff in heaven. Yeah, oh yeah.
But even with the stories, the sun setting like the Alexander the Great story, that there's actual stuff that they miss out from the end, because the story makes sense if you kind of read it in the actual original literature. That he goes, was it to the Iron Wall, and after then there's like a battle after that they miss out, and without that battle, the whole story just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's like they kind of miss some stuff out that's vital to the story. It's like frustrating. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's only frustrating if you expect the Quran to actually make any earthly sense whatsoever.
That's what I was saying. That's the point I was making earlier.
Well,
Because it begins with story. It doesn't finish. It's like somebody with ADHD wrote this book. Because
No.
it doesn't finish the story.
It's not ADHD. It's someone who didn't have Arabic as their first language. It was someone who had Arabic as a second or third or fourth language. So look at it as someone who has I'll give you ADHD, and yeah, they can't stay on topic.
Well, I tell you what they did have. They had DUMB is what they had.
Well,
that's a correct diagnosis of that.
ADHD and ESL issues, ESL issues. ASL, Arabic as a second language issues.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think he was an epileptic, so he just spaz out at random times.
He didn't say Muhammad could actually write, so I'm not giving him any credit as the writer. Whoever put it together, whoever actually wrote these down, didn't. There's no way they actually.
Well, I did have a question on that. Okay, now isn't there a hadith where when Muhammad goes and finally takes over Mecca, there was somebody who had recorded the Quran for him and then had changed these things, and then he had that person killed? Who is this? Is this the same guy that we were talking about before?
he wanted to have him killed, but they didn't kill him because they looked for a sign from the prophet, and the prophet said, "I do not kill as a sign." I don't know, something stupid like that.
So to clarify, I don't recall the name of the person offhand, but to clarify, this was Muhammad's scribe, and Muhammad told him.
Wartica?
No.
Wartica?
No,
Wartica
no.
wasn't he the priest or the Catholic? The
Khadija's
Christian.
uncle.
Yeah, Wartica. Yeah, that's right. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So anyway, Muhammad's saying that I just got this revelation, and he, the scribe says something like, "Isn't Allah amazing?" And he's like, "Yep, write that too." And he's like, "Wait a minute."
Muhammad can't write anything. He's illiterate. So somebody else.
Right. So the scribe, in response to the revelation, says something along the lines of, "Allah is so amazing," for the revelation that he just said. And then Muhammad says, "Yep, write that too." And then the guy's like, "Well, wait a minute. I thought these were the words of Allah, but I had that thought. That didn't come from Muhammad. So that either means I'm a prophet and got the same revelation at the same time, or Muhammad's making things up." So he apostatized because of that.
Yeah.
And then Muhammad kills him for apostatizing.
No, he didn't. He ran from Muhammad. His name Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh. He ran from Muhammad from Medina. He went to Mecca. And when Muhammad conquered Mecca, he was forced to return back to Islam.
Did he go back to Islam? I thought he killed him.
to save his life. To save his life. And his words is in Quran till now. It's he said Allah is the best of the creators. In the verse of embryology in Quran, he added these words, and it's still till now. You have it till now.
Go get that sperm out here back.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, here. Dragon put it in there. Zayd Ibn Thabit. Is that who you said that's? Is that right?
Zayd Ibn Thabit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I remember hearing that. And you just. And here's the amazing thing: you hear so many absurd stories that these people believe, and when you get into an argument, and this is I've had. Do you all remember Stephanie from Facebook? Stephanie Evison.
Whatever happened to her?
I don't know. She's blocked me, but okay. I remember having a conversation with her one morning about this dual carnane and going to where the sun sets in a muddy pool. And it's just like you put them on their heels to say, okay, the Quran says that he saw the sun setting in a muddy pool. And she'll say, well, no, I know the Arabic. Of course, what am I, who am I to, argue with her? It says as if. And then when you go to Corpus Quran, I get it. And you go to Corpus Quran and you look at the transliteration there, and it doesn't say as if. And then they'll say, well, there's nothing else that supports it. And you say, well, just a second here. We have this hadith where Muhammad's out riding a camel or a donkey or somebody with somebody. And the guy, he asks the guy, he goes, well, do you know where the sun sets? And the guy, oh, well, only Allah's apostle would know something like this. And then he says in a hadith, a sahih hadith, he says, well, yeah, it sets in a muddy pool of water. So not only do you have it in the Quran, but you also have the hadith that verify that this is what
corroborates
Muhammad,
it.
Thank you. Corroborates that. Is there a second hadith that supports that, or is that the only one? It doesn't. The point is, it doesn't matter. But the point is that you have this, and they'll still deny it because they know, of course, that the sun doesn't set
idiotic.
in the water. So they'll come up with all of these, and like I said at the beginning of the show, these are rescuing devices that are developed to defend the indefensible. That cat has got to have his own YouTube channel, Thaddeus.
He's famous now.
This is what Usama was actually talking about yesterday. Where he was talking about a conversation he'd had with someone who came and she was wearing a niqab, and he said hello to her. She was apparently working at the store that he was at, and greeted him with an Islamic greeting, and he's like,
Salam alaikum.
Yeah, and he's like, nah, this is I'm a believer in Jesus. I don't need that. And
who said this?
Talking to
Usama.
Usama did. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And he's talking about how this woman, he mentioned the scripture, and she's like, oh no, it doesn't say this, but like that's not. I don't believe that. But at the same time, she knew all these other scriptures that were and she could quote them accurately. He's like, well, this woman's nothing but a deceiver. She's practicing. That's what we run into. You run into those who know and deceive, and those who don't know. That's where there's a vast majority of those who don't know compared to those who deceive, unfortunately.
Well, one of the chief purveyors of that is that Ibn Farouk. Is that even the guy from California that did now? Did he stage that, or okay? Have they figured out whether that was staged or not yet? Has anybody figured that out, or nobody wants to really say anything because if it wasn't staged and it really was stabbed, and look at all you haters out there, saying it was staged when it really was.
The pictures of the blood wound is not consistent with the stabbing. I mean, okay, the blood traveled upwards. Don't know how that works.
What?
The pictures that you see, Yeah, he no, that part is fake. He said the guy tried to cut me. So tried implies that he tried to cut you but didn't cut you. But then he said he went to urgent care and he shows this big bandage on him, which doesn't make any sense. So maybe he was cut. I don't know. But either way, the dude's an idiot because he confronted definitely a mentally unstable man, got out of his car, and went toe to toe. That's something you should not do. I mean, I'm just saying. Okay, clearly the man was mentally unstable. I mean, if it wasn't, a Jesse Smollett type kind of crime, but
the giveaway,
juicy. Yeah, go ahead.
The real giveaway with this, I mean, I saw the video, is that little picture. I mean, it's a very quick flick of blood, and when you look at that, the way it doesn't make sense the way the blood, or whatever they're calling blood, the way it's setting and the different colors, and the color on his hands is not consistent with human blood. So there's a lot of problems.
Do they have a close up of this guy with his hand?
AP and David Wood did a video of it, and I think it's probably one of the best I've seen. Because it gives a close up of that. And that's where I'm saying, there's no
police report, there's no arrest record, there's nothing.
Oh yeah, because that's the funny thing of it. I mean, they say, well, he's claiming these things, so there should be a police report, and there isn't. So yeah,
there is.
Well, that's clearly Islamophobia. That's clearly Islamophobia because.
Whoa, stop. Okay, this guy gets stabbed, and there's no police report of this.
No, can't find nothing on it.
Wow.
The police are aware that he's making these statements. That's what we do know.
And well, not only that, but he said the reason why we don't release the name and all this other stuff is because the police are investigating him because if he's involved with other Christian groups, because he's also attacked Buddhists and he's also attacked other people. So yes, these are clearly Christians that the police are investigating him. I mean, no. Dude, my Islamophobia fake attack spidey sense is kicking in here hardcore. So yeah. Well, I should call the police department and just ask them.
Well, the point that I was trying to make with that was I didn't know all this other stuff. I just knew that was somebody had said that it was a fake attack, but this is the level of deception that they're willing to go to in order to deceive or to try to gin up some type of sympathy for. I mean, the CARE itself, you talk about a grievance mongering organization.
Well, we just got to call them what they are: Hamas in America.
Right. You're exactly right. That's exactly what they are. Okay, how did that happen? John, did you? Never mind. John Isaac dropped out, and did you just automatically come back in?
I think it's something wrong in my internet connection when it goes weak signal. It goes down and return back when it comes strong again. It's something weird, but it happened.
No, you have special powers here, my friend, because
his
I
icon
want to click you back in, and before I could click you back in, you're back into the show. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I don't know. Have you hacked my account, John, or something? I don't know what you're doing.
No, it happens many times for StreamYard. When you go with weak signal and return back to a strong signal, return back. This has happened.
Well, I've seen that happens that normally happens to you during the show, and that I'm glad you always that you're always coming back here. Okay, so Thaddeus, can you think of anything else that we need to be talking about today?
Well,
I have you here. I want to pick your brain for crying out loud, but I really don't know.
Yeah. You can ask me anything you like, but first I did look up some of the verses that speak of the end time for reference here. They're mostly the Meccan verses. Like by the time that he got to Medina, perhaps he didn't have this opinion anymore. But 76 and 7, the start of chapter 54, this is the splitting of the moon, but it has nothing to do with Muhammad. It has to do with the end times. 2015 the start of 21, 79, 42 through 46, 31, 44, 7, 187, 33, 63. There's a few more, but those are the ones that are more clear, I think.
Okay, so what you're saying that they're mainly Meccan verses, and then by the time he gets to Medina, he's forgotten all of these. What he had said in Mecca.
So the 3363 is interesting because instead of saying the hour is near, it says perhaps the hour is near. Like perhaps he has started to doubt whether the end times are really upon him. Like that was his opinion, and then he's starting to doubt it, and that's considered a Medinan verse. So it's certainly interesting.
Did you see the show that Mary was on here last Tuesday?
I only saw a few minutes of it.
Okay,
so
well, I tell you what, that woman is. What a wealth of knowledge, because she went in there and she picked apart this verse where Muhammad's worried about the rain and how he was scared. He was literally scared of the end times coming about, or him being destroyed anytime he saw a rain cloud. And in Mecca, that's not that frequent because it never rains there. They get 4 inches of rain.
But again, if you're talking about the desert influence, the concept of a rainstorm in the desert is a flash flood. So we actually had kids visit us from Vegas area, and here I am in Rochester, New York. We'll have a downpour, and the kids were screaming, and we got to get to high ground, and they're 6 and 5, and we're in the car, and we're kind of like, it's okay, we don't have to go in place. And and it's coming down like cats and dogs, and 10 minutes later it's gone. The kids are like, is it safe to get out of the car?
Well, I could see where that would be like a regional belief.
So that's,
it's very
I think that's almost part of how we have to look at it. But you got to wonder, again, this guy's mind is nothing. His God is not any bigger than a small-minded desert person. And that's the truth about that small God.
Look at Darcy's writing here. Darcy she's got a sense of humor that just, I don't know, on the side of a mouse. This is true. And the guy was.
You know what, Darcy? If he ran at the size of an ant, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, ants can talk.
Ants talk. I mean, that would be scary. I tell you what, if an ant started talking to me, I'm done. I'm
Time for the funny farm.
Maybe they were preempting the Bugs Life film on the Pixar. or ants. That's where they got the inspiration from. Was like the Quran for.
Okay, I wanted to switch back to your channel, Thaddeus. Reasoned Answers YouTube channel, and I watched the video. You said you took like 10 months off.
Yes.
And then you're coming back. So what is the focus of your channel going to be in the future? What can we look forward to there?
Yes. So what I'm currently looking at is I'm looking at new ways to explore the early history of Islam. In particular, I'm looking at a number of avenues, in particular looking at early Christian polemics against Islam, because these kind of. So the most obvious example of how Christianity would develop Islam would develop in response to these polemics is the idea of Muhammad becoming a miracle worker. We see explicit statements in the Quran that Muhammad was given no miracles. And then we see the Christian polemics, and they talk about how Jesus is obviously superior, how he's obviously how Muhammad's obviously a false prophet because he couldn't work any miracles, and then lo and behold, the Sirah literature is filled with miracles of Muhammad. Mm-hmm. So that one's pretty straightforward. That's pretty obvious. But then we can ask the question: well, what else developed in response to these polemics? What else developed in response to what Christians were saying about Muhammad? And one thing that I think is pretty solid is the idea that Muhammad is illiterate, developed in response to polemics. If you look at who he was supposed to be, he's supposed to be a trader who's making journeys across vast territory, and that he kind of needs to be literate to do that job. And when you look at the earlier texts, the Quran has a number of passages that are translated as unlettered or illiterate, but when you look at them in context, the Arabic word is ummi, and you look at it and you try to find, well, what does that word actually mean? And it's contrasted between people who have scripture and people who don't. It has nothing to do with literacy in a technical sense. It has to do with not having the scriptures. So what the Quran is saying when it's saying that he's an unlettered prophet, as translated, is that he's the prophet of the people who have not previously received the scriptures, which is consistent with the general message of the Quran, that it says we've sent a messenger to every nation, and now we've sent one to the Arabs as well. But then you're like, well, why in the world would you make him illiterate if he wasn't? Well, the reason is because the earliest Christian polemics talked about how he was copying Christian texts, how he was doing this copy and paste prophecy. And then the response from the Muslims is, I know what to do. Let's say he's illiterate. Then he couldn't possibly have copied these stories. And we find that exact defense in the Quran. And it says, they're accusing him of copying, but those people speak a different language. He couldn't have copied. They accuse him of copying, but lo and behold, you've never been given any scriptures before, Muhammad. The Muslims will interpret that as saying that he's illiterate, but what it's actually saying is you weren't given any scripture. These people are lying about these accusations. So that's currently the thing I'm looking at. And then the other thing that I'm looking at is what Hanafi means. The Quran repeatedly calls it says that the religion of the Muslims, or the religion of the believers, is Hanafi. It says the religion of Allah is Hanafi. It says the religion of Abraham is Hanafi. And it turns out that this term is a term that most likely derives from Syriac, meaning heretics, or people outside. Heathens would be another way to put it. That people who are outside, Gentile might be a more neutral translation, without the connotation of being, barbaric or wrong or whatever.
And they're trying to say that means more like one God, believe in one God.
Yeah. So what it probably means is that people were using this term to describe this proto-Islamic movement as heretical. They were saying that you guys are wrong, and then they adopted the term for themselves, saying, yes, we are that, but you misunderstand what it means. It's the religion of Abraham, his real religion, not Judaism. His real religion was Hanafi. So it's a very interesting idea, and we see this all the time in social settings, that groups will adopt terms that are intended to be offensive by their opponents, and they'll adopt them for themselves as a way to neutralize the term. Even the term Christian is a possible example of that people are using as a derogatory term, like, calling people little Christ, and like, actually, that's a pretty good description. We're gonna adopt that for ourselves. We're gonna start calling ourselves the Christians, because if you look at the early chapters of Acts, it's actually called the Way. That there were people who had discovered they were Jewish people who had discovered the Way. They discovered the Messiah, and that's what they were calling themselves. And then opponents started calling them Christians, and they're like, actually, that's not a bad term. We're just going to adopt that term. So it seems that might be the case of what happened in early Islam, that Christians and Jewish people were saying, you guys are the heretics, and then they're like, yes, we are.
Hanafis.
Yeah, but you misunderstand what the term means. You're saying that we're not part of your religion, but we agree because you have the wrong religion.
Right.
If
you look at that email that you sent me, the email address is Eric Thekafer, which is Eric the Kafir, which is kind of a mocking way of doing exactly what you're saying here. with that. Ed, were you going to say something? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, it's all right. I was just going to say that in the Hadith, he's actually busted himself because he claims to have written something, and I posted it in our private here, where it actually says, "Come near, so that Allah's messenger may write for you a writing after which you will not go astray." And that's Sunnah.com, Sahih Bukhari 7366.
Yeah, there's several traditions that seem to imply Muhammad knew how to write. There's probably about 6 or 8 hadith that seem to say that he could write, and then all of a sudden, no, he's the illiterate prophet.
So your supposition, you're saying that all of this information has been redacted back onto.
Yeah, it's specifically in response to Christian polemics, that there was a clear, vigorous dialogue between early Christians and early Muslims, and the Muslim side of it is kind of been destroyed. We only have the Christian side of it, which makes it hard because it is polemical writing. It is obviously biased, but when it explains things that don't make any sense in the Islamic narrative, like all these hadith about Muhammad writing stuff, even though he's supposed to be illiterate, and they say, well, maybe they developed this idea that he was illiterate later on. Maybe that wasn't original.
Well, this book right here, I'm sure you've read this, John of Damascus. Okay, and this is where you have a guy, this is 100 years after the supposed death of Muhammad, where nobody, they don't even say a Muslim in this. He didn't know who the Muslims were. So when you start talking about this idea of being redacted back onto, this 7th century Islam makes perfect sense. Go ahead, Dominic. I'm sorry.
No, because it's a lot of plagiarism. Is that I guess if he's at university now, he wouldn't even get his stuff. Sorry, my thoughts. I had something. I've suddenly gone out of me.
Well, imagine when you get my age, what it's going to be like.
Yeah, I had a line of thought. It's suddenly gone.
I know sometimes we get, and I'll do that sometimes. We'll sit there having a discussion, and I'll just veer just a little bit off it, and then I'll come back and I'm like, nope, ain't got it. Let's just move on because I completely forgot about what we were talking about. Okay, so when you start talking about the early history of Islam, are you going to be looking at Mecca at all? Because we've done a couple shows on the absolute absence of any evidence for a 7th century Mecca.
Yeah, so I'm working close with Lloyd de Jong, and he's kind of doing the cultural and archaeology background of Islam, and I'm looking specifically at the figure behind Muhammad, the founder of the religion, if you will. So my research is focusing on Muhammad, but he's doing all the cultural background. And we've actually had a number of shows looking at possible southern antecedents to Islam. A lot of the research is focused on northern influences, either in Petra or Jerusalem, or possibly in Iraq. And we don't necessarily disagree with that. We just think the picture's incomplete because Islam's kind of borrowing from everywhere. So we've looked at a number of southern antecedents to Islam, and specifically the Ethiopic. We haven't quite got in there yet, but where we're going is that the Ethiopic church was a major influence on Islam.
The Coptic part?
No, so the Ethiopic. I can't remember the proper term of the church, but there's I
thought the Ethiopic church was a Coptic. I'm willing to be wrong.
Coptic is Egyptian.
Coptic is just the Egyptian word.
Oh, okay. Duh. Okay, so that's probably where I'm. All right. So there you go, Dominic. That's what it's going to be like, dude. I promise you. Okay. So when you mentioned these locations, Dan Gibson does a really good job in Chronic Geography. If you ever get a chance to get this book, and he outlines the number of geographical. The mentioning of specific geographical locations in the Quran. And it mentions people called the people of Ad and the people of Talmud, and it mentions the people of Ad 23 times and the people of Talmud 24 times. And these people groups are known to be people groups up around where Petra is today. So that makes all the sense in the world, where if he's commenting on these people, I mean, he would know them, he would have interacted with them. Well, how's he interacting with people that are 600 miles away? So
Yeah,
and from that reason.
And the stories of Muhammad being the trader and going up into Syria to trade there, and that's where he learned Christianity. This is what the Christian sources say, which there's echoes of in the Islamic texts as well. So there's certainly plenty of evidence for a northern origin. Like I said, we don't necessarily disagree with those theories. We're just saying that there's also southern influence. A lot of the descriptions cited for why Mecca can't possibly be where it's located today, the growing of certain fruits and the palm trees and whatnot, those work in Yemen as well. Then it would be a good description of that area as well. So it could be further north, could be further south. Definitely not where Muslims say it is. That's the only place it really can't be. So we're not suggesting that those theories are wrong. We've discussed some evidence of northern origins as well. We're just saying that maybe people aren't seeing the whole picture, because I think what Islam originally was basically a political movement. They're just uniting people with a diverse set of beliefs, and they're uniting people for political reasons in order to ultimately wage war even further north against the Byzantines and the Persians. So because they're pulling from all these different, they're attempting to build their armies from all these different places, then they probably have pseudo-religious influences from a variety of different places as well, not just from the Petra area.
Well, they would have to have some unifying factor if you look at what they did, within 100 years, they're crossing the Straits of Gibraltar, and they're in Spain and France, for crying out loud, and they're the Hindu Kush. As far as they went eastward. So the rapid expansion, I could see where you would have to have some type of unifying religion or political ideology. I mean, today it would, in a lot of ways, it's a political ideology, but at the time it would be, of course, religion. When you see the development of it over time and the redaction of beliefs that developed with the Umayyads or the Abbasid empires.
Yeah, and specifically this idea that's totally foreign to our mindsets, but that someone could be a warrior and a king and a prophet and a religious leader all at the same time, that has strong antecedents in the Yemen area, that they had this idea that the person who was in charge of the military would also be a prophet speaking on behalf of God. So it's a very interesting connection. I think a lot of it is highly speculative. I'm by no means saying that we've solved this mystery. I just think it's information worth exploring, and that's what I'm attempting to do.
Well, you want to hear here's a scary little factoid. The Sana manuscript. Sana manuscript discovered in 1975. Okay, this manuscript is a palimpsest. And I'm probably telling you stuff that you already know. We know what the underlying underwriting said, and the underwriting is not the same as what was written over on this. But the carbon dating on this, they've done some of the carbon dating on this predates Muhammad by 2 centuries. That they've done. And this is not from me. This is from the Islamic Awareness website. They posted these dates on there. I got pictures of it. I don't know if it's still on there or not. But if you're talking about a development from Yemen, San is in Yemen itself. So this very well may be the origins of Islam 2 centuries prior to that. That'd be kind of an interesting.
Yeah, and another interesting tidbit is that the Quran multiple times speaks of the Sabians, or the Sabians, and this is a group that basically had died out before the Quran was written, which it makes sense that there would be a cultural memory in Yemen. They're located, the center of power was in that region, so it makes sense there'd be a cultural memory there. But it doesn't necessarily make that much sense that there would be a cultural memory of this group, and it declares they're people of the book even. And the later Islamic writers will talk about how they share a lot of practices in common, like the 5 daily prayers and the ritual washing and so forth. Now, the later Islamic authors could be making stuff up. That's definitely a possibility, that they've projected these beliefs back onto people. But another possibility is that this was an influence, that the remembrance of this great society that was, it was a major world power. This is the Queen of Sheba in the Bible. Right. That they're a major power located very far south in Yemen, and they're interacting with people all the way up in Israel, in Palestine. So they have a huge sphere of influence. And then there's a major natural disaster, and that's kind of the end of the political and social power of the group. They were already on the decline before the natural disaster, to be clear.
We are currently surrounded by...
That was interesting.
Yeah, so something happened on
Somebody's alter ego firing away there. Sorry.
Sorry.
No worries. So there's this natural disaster, and that kind of wipes out the last remnants of the political power. But of course, it doesn't wipe out the people. So there's still a cultural memory, even though the empire has fallen. And the Quran mentions this, I think, like 4 or 5 times, which is not like a massive number, but I mean, it's more than it mentions Mecca. Let's put it that way.
Right,
So
sure, yeah. Or Jerusalem.
So it does seem to be of a curious factor that kind of needs an explanation.
Well, here's something I wanted to bring up. I cannot find this article. Maybe somebody else can. This is kind of a huge discovery. They found so they found these to the way north of where Mecca is. Remember, Mecca was supposed to be on the caravan trading routes. Okay, well, there's several problems with that. But way to the north, there is a trading route. Like, we're talking 300-400 miles to the north, okay? Because there was this northern kingdom. I forgot what it was called. Maybe you mentioned it, because I'd have to step away. But anyway, what they found along this route are all these graves. Because people traveling, they die. What are you going to do with them when they die and they're traveling? So they found them using Google Earth, of all things, okay? And they went out and dug, and they found this huge trail. There's all these graves. And they're not just graves along the road, but they had all these ancient cemeteries, during the time of Muhammad and long before that, okay? So this is a major trading road. But it was nowhere near Mecca or even Medina, okay? And you don't find the same thing when you look at anything around Mecca, okay, which is now one giant parking lot with a Big Ben clock for some reason. Yeah, weird. But be that as it may, no, the whole thing, dude. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. The whole thing of Islam, I am of the firm belief that there was never anybody called Muhammad. There may have been many Muhammads. Muhammad is just a title for a holy one or something like that. And that they just kind of, like you said, Theos, this was a political thing. They banned these tribes together because they had outgrown their resources living in the desert. Rome and Persia, Egypt, and the southern kingdoms, the Nesabite kingdom, whatever was the Christian kingdom, they were all in decline. The Yemenite kingdoms, they were all in decline because they're all fighting each other for centuries. They bled themselves white. The Roman and Persian garrisons and Egyptian garrisons that were on the border towns had either depleted their removed their troops, or drew back. So these raiding caravan robbers, these desert thieves, banded together, and they just got the momentum going where they were taking over stuff. And somehow somebody got the idea, hey, we've got a religion too, and we give you booty. Come and follow us. And so face it, if you're young, 14, 18 years old, living in one of these desert border towns, and you ain't got nothing going on, and somebody comes up to you and tells you, hey, come with us and go rob and kill. You get all kinds of plunder, and if you die, you go to heaven. Okay, what are you going to do? Sounds like a good deal to me. I'm out of here. Sorry, Mom, Dad, leave. I'm gone. You know what I mean? Okay? I mean, right, sorry, but that's my 2 points on it.
Because the archaeology is interesting, because on the early coins, it's either Byzantine or Sassanian. There's nothing referring to Muhammad in the early coins. So when you look at the early archaeology, there's no real foundation for anything. So that's what kind of thing. So it must be early, like Byzantine or Sassanian, and they must have created their identity later. I mean, you haven't got any writings, even like try and find any Umayyad writings. It's almost impossible. Have any of you tried to look for any writings during that time period, or if you ever tried to find?
Hasn't Mel developed a lot of information from the earliest coins? Is that who's done that?
That was
Anjay.
Odin.
Okay.
Odin,
LaFontaine, right? Okay.
I
know it was one of the okay because Jay's had quite a few people on there presenting all kinds of different strands of evidence. And from the historicity of it, Thaddeus, I think you're spot on with that, and going that angle. And Paul doesn't like that word, but when we start looking at the absolute absence of evidence for this from other than, I mean, for Christianity, you can find signs of Christianity, evidence for Christianity outside the Christian sources from the first, second century. But with Islam, it's not that way. You don't find anything. In Rad hit on it early, just a couple seconds ago about the complete lack of archaeological evidence, and now there's no ability to get any archaeological evidence because they've cemented the entire thing over.
Yeah, I mean, when we kind of see Islam like appearing out of nowhere, like it doesn't seem to have a history. And it certainly had a history. I mean, that's not how things work. They don't just come out of nowhere. And I think that there was a concerted effort to remove the history. I think that, under the Abbasids, they were like, we got to clean this up. We got to clean up our history. Because, I mean, what they really cared about was justifying their military conquests. But they needed a justification for that. They're like, all right, this history's all messed up. It's got all kinds of different stuff in it. Let's just delete it all. Let's just get rid of all of this information and let's write a new state-ordered biography, state-sponsored biography of Muhammad. That would be what we know as Ibn Ishaq. And everything that was before that, we don't need it anymore. Let's just get rid of it.
Yeah, and I agree 100% because look at Ibn Ishaq. I mean, he lives a century after Muhammad. How are you going to write a biography? So we're not like you guys. You did a 5-hour program the other day. How do you do a program for 5? And I've talked.
I mean, that wasn't planned. So what I actually did is I presented. I actually have a 6 and a 5 in the last week, so I'm not sure which one you're referring to. But in both cases, the presentation was about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and then we opened up the stream for Muslims to come in to dispute with us. So then the rest of the time is us talking to Muslims.
Okay, well, that would keep you going, I suppose. But when I saw the time on that, I said, okay, because we have another guy here, Dr. Critical Thinker, Kufar Phobia. He does these 7 hour streams. Paul, and you're just as guilty as he is for doing them. But we here in the Crescent discussion group, we do 2 hours, and then we're out and we're at that.
I do the 6 and 7 hours with Critical. Not that's.
I know you guys are crazy. I don't.
We're just trying to. That was just doing we're dissecting through the Quran, and. Yeah, that's how we started out. I think our biggest one was 5-6 hours.
Yeah, YouTube's going to start charging you guys house rent, man.
Well, we're keeping it to 2 now.
So both of those shows, Adam Seeker joined, and Adam Seeker, he loves his 5-hour streams. So that's how that's going.
That guy, he could go 24/7 if you let him. You have to cut that man off because he is just one thing right after another, and then that sense of humor of his. I mean, it is just.
He's great.
Yeah, he is. He's
with Islam, it says there's a verse. I forget where it's at, but it says if what you're saying is trustworthy, then present your holy writ. Well, we can, right? And just above that, it talks about that God had no son. So we can prove that in our holy writ. The thing is Allah doesn't prove anything of his so-called book. So he throws it on everybody else to prove when we can, but he doesn't. He doesn't prove anything.
Have you heard about those recent inscriptions? Because Mel did a whole just a video on that subject, and he's got pictures of the Dome of the Rock with another level, and then he goes back to, was it a synagogue place? Like there was like a synagogue or something there, place there first, and then there was something else kind of place there afterwards. So essentially from the 14th century. So he kind of dates that inscription a lot later than the actual Muslims actually state it was. So he doesn't say it's from the time of Abdul Malik. He actually states it's from a lot later sources.
Yeah, I haven't actually watched the material yet, but I do know what he's going through. And you're correct. He's going through a specific paper written by an academic that is kind of talking about the true history of the Dome of the Rock. And his thesis is that all of the inscriptions come from much later. Traditionally, they're thought to be some of the earliest pieces of evidence for Islam. And now we're saying, well, maybe not, because the temple or the dome has been destroyed a couple times, or at least partially destroyed a couple times. So maybe these inscriptions really are later, which would be interesting for sure.
But there's lots of stuff you have to re-question, because essentially you bring up some of the archaeological evidence, and it's like there's no way that can happen during that time, because you've got other writings that would go like the whole images of Muhammad. I mean, you can't have images of Muhammad and you've got the hadith at the same time, because that contradicts one another. But Islam is a contradiction in itself.
Yeah. I mean, I think the summary is it's a massive, confusing puzzle that you got evidence pointing one way, and you got evidence pointing another way, and evidence pointing a third way, and a fourth way, and it's like, how do I bring all this together? There's got to be some solution, and it's really hard, because, like I've said a couple of times, I think they purposely removed all the history. They purposely removed all the evidence, so all we have left is these faint echoes of the evidence. Things that were too subtle to clean out of the accepted hadith. Coins, a coin can't so easily be destroyed. The traditionally thought to be the inscription at the Dome of the Rock would be something that was very early, and now maybe even that's not. So, but what we do have is texts written by people who were not Muslims, and for some reason historians have generally discarded these, saying that probably because they say something so different than the Islamic narrative, like, all right, these people must have just had no clue what they were talking about.
I was wanting stuff like pig's bones in one of these Islamic sites. pork or something like that. They dig up pork and they only ate bacon during those time periods. Sorry.
Wouldn't that be amazing if we found something?
A history of pig roasts in Mecca.
That would be.
It's interesting. Speaking on that, one of the things that during the Exodus, the time period of the Exodus, I mean, within a couple hundred years of the time frame of the Exodus, depending on when it's dated, what's interesting is before this in Israel, in archaeological digs, they find all kinds of pig farms. Okay, because pork is, it's a very cheap, maintenance free, because the pigs will eat anything and they wallow in their own crap, so it doesn't matter. You don't really have to maintain them much, and they're very easy to domesticate. So very quick source of protein. But they find all over Israel, Canaanite, whatever you want to call it in that time, they find all these pig farms. After the Exodus, within 200 to 300 years, all of a sudden these pig farms start disappearing. Something happened. A different group of people came to the land at that point in time, and kind of changed everything. And then later the Romans came in and they brought pork with them as well. But it's just kind of interesting, speaking of pigs and archaeology, because, it's just interesting to me.
Well, they know the value of bacon.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because the big thing with the Exodus is the Mount Evil inscription. you must have heard of Mount Ebal inscription. So where they found the Exodus kind of the Proto-Semitic kind of inscription, which uses the name Yahweh from the actual time of the Exodus.
In the Sinai, is that what you're referring to, Dominic?
No. So there's an inscription that they found that because if you in the biblical text you have Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and there's like blessings and cursings on those mountains. So Mount Gerizim there's like a temple built, but on Mount Ebal there's like an altar. So Dr. Scott Stripling kind of found this. He's recently just released this inscription, which is like this lead inscription that like a kind of law kind of tablet from that kind of time period. But they've also got so during that time period they also had so in the passage it talks about that they put plaster around the actual altar and wrote the Torah around the actual altar. So they've actually got some of the plaster that they may actually kind of look at to see whether there's like the Torah inscription from that date as well, which may be fascinating.
Oh, that's interesting. You'll have to share some links on that. I'd like to read up on that.
Yeah, that's a recent thing that's just out. So that's the Mount Ebal.
Okay, guys, we're going to wrap this up. When I started talking about 2 hours, I was serious about that.
I'll join you another time.
Eric's a 2-hour guy.
That's right, yeah. Okay, well, Thaddeus, it has been a joy to have you here today. We really appreciate you taking your Sunday afternoon off and coming out and sitting and having a good chat with us. And for people in chat, I appreciate you all so very much for coming and contributing and fellowshipping there. Some of you, I'll fix that later. I wanted to end with two things here. Number one, tomorrow our brother Chris Claus is going to be on Al Fadi's show, talking about the early sources for the Gospels. He's been on here, I think 3 weeks ago. We were talking about that, and he's going to be on with Al Fadi tomorrow. And I wanted to end with this. I ran into this quote. That's what it is. It's Soren Kierkegaard wrote, and it's kind of profound. There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. And when we think of today's show, people who believe things that are not true, and then when shown what is true, they refuse to believe what is true. So I think that's a very good quote to end the show on. All right. God bless you all. Thank you so much for coming, and we will see you Tuesday, 5:00. If you have any ideas or anything that you guys want to talk about on Tuesday, go ahead and email me or Skype me, or how else you guys do it? Instant message.
Facebook Messenger.
Yeah, you guys are always sending me Facebook messengers, and we'll see you all then. God bless. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you Tuesday.
God bless.
God bless.
All right, let me end the broadcast.
God bless.